God is good. And all the time. I want to appreciate all of your parents for sending us the clips of your home videos and that you've had a chance to see yourself on the big screen this morning. I love the story. The Sunday school teacher was teaching 5- and 6-year-olds about the commandments, and they had just talked about how to honor your father and your mother. Then she said, so is there a commandment that speaks to how we're supposed to treat our siblings, our brothers and sisters? The oldest of 3 raised his hand and said, yeah, thou shalt not kill. How many of you have brothers and sisters? Raise your hands, raise your hands. Do you have any stories of sibling rivalry? No, right. We're going to begin by lying to each other today. Okay. I've never forgotten, I've told you before, I have this image forever etched in my mind. I'm the youngest of 3 boys, just an angel in so many ways. And so I don't know how, but I'd managed to pick a fight with my older brother, and he was on top of me, held me down on the ground, and he said, Tom, I give you 2 choices, 6 months unconscious or instant death. I knew right then that there were limits in my life. Well, so we're looking at this story of Joseph, Genesis chapter 37 through 50. If you have the chance to read it, there are just storylines that abound in this particular pericope of Scripture dealing with Joseph and his family. And yes, it's about family and the dysfunction of that in so many ways. And I wanted to just spend a little time there in camp with this story a little bit today. This story about Joseph being born, the first son to Jacob and Rachel. And so Scripture tells us how things settled down immediately by Jacob making this pronouncement that he loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Now, he had 12 at that point. There were 12 older brothers, older than Joseph. We learn very quickly in the storyline that Joseph is a tattletale. You know, when you find your older siblings doing something, you begin to realize that knowledge is power. And so you take that knowledge and you run to your mom and daddy. How many of y'all were tattletales? I'm confessing. Oh, y'all's just like, yeah, I tattletale a little bit. Yeah, I see you. Then Joseph makes the mistake of kind of grinding this in his brother's face a little more after being a tattletale because he's shown favoritism. His daddy gives him this beautiful multicolored robe ornamentally that just stands out as a symbol of his father's love for him. And he's strutting his stuff. I mean, are you getting the picture here? Joseph is a little snot. That's what he is. He's just a snobby kid who is loving to rub the favoritism of his father towards him in his brothers' faces. And so he continues to add fuel to the fire when he tells his brother about a dream he had. And he lets them know that in this dream, what is depicted is that all of them bow down before him. It's a wonder they didn't kill him right then. But they started thinking about it. As a matter of fact, when they're out in the fields later, they began to plot to murder him. This is premeditated murder, folks. And so sure enough, when Joseph shows up in the fields next, the brothers are there. Well, they have some more conversation, and they just can't really bring themselves to kill him. So instead, they rough him up, tear that robe off of him, and throw him down in a hole. And they're sitting over there eating, trying to figure out what they're going to do. And a slave caravan comes by. And the idea comes, why don't we just sell that little sell our little brother into slavery? That way we'll make money. And then they said, well, what are we going to tell Daddy? Because Daddy knows he's out here. So they hatch this plot. They're going to take this multicolored robe and rip it to shreds, pour goat's blood on it, and present it to their father and let their father fill in the blanks for him, which he does. He begins to grieve immediately that his son has been killed and attacked by some ferocious animal. And so this story of lies and deceit and favoritism and beating up your younger brother, all of this is going on. And then the story doesn't stop. It gets crazier. It's like a roller coaster. There's ups and there's downs. Immediately upon arrival in Egypt there, we understand that things go very well for Joseph. He slides right into this servant role as a slave and becomes the leader of the slaves in this particular household. And so now he's supervising. He's got the master's grace on him, and he's been empowered. But then things turn badly. He's accused of rape, which he did not commit. He goes to prison anyway, falsely accused, sitting in prison. The story continues. The king has a dream and doesn't know what to do about it. He's unsettled. Somebody says, well, we got this guy named Joseph in the cell, and apparently he's pretty good at interpreting dreams. King says, well, bring him up here. And he interprets the dream being that Egypt is going to fall into famine. As a matter of fact, all the lands will fall into famine. And so you better begin storing up the grain and everything you can now to prepare for the famine. And the king says, I'm just going to empower you. He becomes the CFO of Egypt. Here is Joseph on this roller coaster of life until he finds himself in this position. Now, when you go back, there's a ton of details I've left out, but suffice it to say, because this famine does happen, Egypt and all the surrounding countries are now at the beckoning call of Joseph and his government that supports him because they have all the grain. In other words, if you're going to survive, you better be in good relationship with Joseph. And so sure enough, even the brothers who back in the hometown realize we've got to go there and come before Joseph if we have any chance of surviving. Now, can you imagine? They're having this conversation saying, yeah, so we got to go back and face our little bro. The one we beat up, ripped his robe off of him, and sold him into slavery. How's that going to go? And so they have this story. They're going to go back and say, our father said to say to you, forgive them. They didn't know what they were doing, and we're going to throw ourselves on the mercy and Joseph's feet. And there we have these words, Joseph's words. And I hear these as a voice that says to me, Tom, listen to this. Listen to how Joseph puts a focus on his brothers being before him, because this voice has something to say to you and to me about the circumstances we may find ourselves in life. You intended, he said to his brothers, you intended to harm me. He probably paused. But God intended this for good, to accomplish what is now being done, which is the saving of many lives. There's a power in these lines that Joseph uses for his brother in terms of what you and I can hear in that voice when life comes at us, when we find ourselves on the roller coaster. It's not a matter of whether or not circumstances will come our way. They're coming if they haven't already. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But isn't it interesting that even though we know this, I don't know about you, I need to confess to you, when life throws its stuff at me, I tend to go back and make some of the same mistakes. And one of the mistakes I make is I want to know why. I want to know why this is happening to me now, why these circumstances have been created, and who's to blame for this? Who's to blame, right? Because we think in knowing these kinds of details that it won't be as painful. We somehow think if we can know the who behind it, if we can know the why behind it, that we can rationalize the pain and the suffering out of the circumstances. The truth is, it doesn't work that way, does it? No amount of knowledge changes the pain of the circumstances or the consequences of the circumstances we find ourselves in. It still hurts. The reality is those things don't go away just because we can explain them, just because we know how it happened. So I'm sure looking at Joseph's story, we could sit down and we could talk about, well, you know, I can tell you who's to blame in this story for all this happening is Joseph. You look at Joseph, we could blame him. I mean, he comes across in his early years as this kid who thinks the world is all about him. I wonder who put that thought in his mind. But wait a minute, we're blaming Joseph here. He seems to have the big head, and he flames that super impressed ego in front of his brothers here, being a tattletale and using knowledge to manipulate his daddy. He uses this super impressed ego to strut in front of them with this multicolored, beautiful, ornamented robe that he's wearing. He arrogantly reveals to his brothers their parts in the dreams that he has had, and he knows they're going to come true. But wait a minute, what if we made the case, no, a lot of this just happened to Joseph, and it was his brothers to blame for all this. You know, there was really no excuse for his older brothers acting out the way they did. I mean, they were really acting out of hatred in this. It dawned on me while I was thinking about this. See, I was the youngest sibling in mine, so I never heard this, but I faintly remember hearing my mom and dad, maybe you heard these words too, that like when you were 5 and you beat up your 2-year-old sibling, that your mom came to you and say, you're older, you should... Oh, no. Oh, you did hear that story. Yeah, I thought maybe you were there. Yeah, that's right. You should know better. Because at 5 years old, you're supposed to be emotionally mature enough not to do that. No, but doesn't that continue all the way through life? As the older sibling, we have this responsibility. But So that we could blame it on them. They should have known better. There's 12 of them and one of him. Perhaps Joseph's brothers should be blamed because they did spend time in premeditating a murder, in putting together this plot. Maybe we should blame them because in the end they did throw him in a hole, sell him off to slavery. Maybe we should blame them because they concoct all the circumstances which would make their daddy believe a lie had been told. So maybe we ought to blame the brothers. Think that would make Joseph feel any better about his circumstances? Because he's in a slave caravan headed to Egypt. And knowing all of that doesn't change anything. Oh, but wait a minute, let's not leave out Jacob. Let's not leave Daddy out of this. Maybe we should blame Daddy. As a father, he did not obviously create equity among his children. I mean, it's obvious he held up one. And if you've ever been a child in that kind of dysfunction, you know the pain of that. And even if you haven't, there are these times in our humanity where we think or we hear stories about what Mama and Daddy did for my brother, what Mama and Daddy did for my sister. And we're thinking, what have they done for me lately? So maybe there's some blame here for Jacob in the midst of all this. But I keep coming back to this point. It really doesn't matter whose fault it is. And it really doesn't matter why it happened or who's to blame, because in the midst of this, the circumstances and the consequences do not change. And the only reason really that we might want to learn why it happened or who's to blame is so we don't repeat it again. I understand that. We don't want to make the same mistake again. But finding that out and spending all of our time, energy, resources around that, getting stuck in that moment of why and who to blame, then we never get to the most important thing, which is how are we going to respond? Regardless of circumstances, does not matter about consequences, we have to respond. To do nothing is a response. We have to respond no matter what. So how do we do that? How does Joseph do this? How do we become responsible enough to say, look, this is the reality, we're in this, so what am I going to do? Am I going to respond with bitterness or with betterness? You can only imagine Joseph's state of mind. He's in a caravan as a slave. What kind of life do you think he's looking forward to? Knowing everything that has happened to him, how he's been treated, confused, angry, scared. I cannot imagine part of the rage that was going on in him. And I think, again, we're faced with that same temptation. We can spin right in that spot of trying to figure out why, who's to blame, because we think in knowing that, we'll get beyond the consequences. We'll move beyond the pain and the suffering. Well, gosh, I guess if we were being honest, there are times we blame God. There are times in which we blame God. And we think, well, if the Almighty's against us, what chance do I have? I'm just going to die. Oh, no, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. We withdraw from God. Maybe we blame God and give up, take our ball and go home because He's not playing by our rules. So we do get into these kind of systems that are not helpful for us. Joseph seemingly chooses differently in terms of his response. Something happened to him in that slave caravan. When you go back and look at the story and you back up, something happened to him. In my sanctified imagination, I want to think, well, he grew up. He knew what he was facing. He has to choose now this way of courage. He's got to trust in God no matter what. He's got to keep on keeping on because he wants to stay alive. So maybe when life hits us, we respond in this way. We do the best we can with what we have every time, everywhere. Every time. Without all the details. We do the best we can with what we have every time, everywhere. Emotionally healthy spirituality refers to some of these events as hitting the wall. I love that image, and if you've ever hit a wall in your life before, not literally, but in the circumstances and storms of life, you get that image. And the difficulty is we can get stuck there if we're not careful. But the invitation from God is we have the invitation to move through that wall, to move beyond that wall, and to meet God where He is already at work to strengthen us, to highlight His glory, to bring honor to His worthiness, to be reminded of His presence, to remember His deep, abiding love in the midst of us being at this wall, and we're paying a price for the pain and the suffering in that moment, but He provides His strength. How do we respond at that moment when we hit the wall? It is to ask this strange question: how can this situation, these circumstances, be redeemed? How can this be redeemed? Well, I would call to your image the cross. The cross is really this most beautiful, powerful symbol of redemption. How you take something so bad and it becomes so good. How you take death and turn it into life. How you take being buried in a tomb into resurrection, and let that cross become this symbol of turning what everybody thought was defeat into victory. And so we've got to focus on something that draws us through this wall we hit. Dr. Moore calls this learning to suffer creatively. And I'm like, okay, something about that. I just want to kind of choke on that suffer part. Learning to suffer creatively. Harry Emerson Fosdick says it like this: quality of character never comes from ease, pleasantness, and comfort. He says, don't waste sorrow. It is too precious. Wow. Talk about bringing value into the midst of what we're trying to deny or seek to make just go away. But the invitation is to suffer creatively and not waste the sorrow at the wall. I'm reminded of the great illustration of the oyster that gets a grain of sand in there and it tries to kick it out, but when it realizes it's just going to be there to irritate me all my life, it takes that sand, that little tiny piece of sand, and does what? It turns it into a pearl. That's a beautiful illustration of learning to take what is given to us in our life and to move forward, suffer creatively with it, and allow God through us together. We redeem it. We redeem it. Reminds me of the man who was in the automobile accident, and the surgeon came in and said, I'm so sorry, I have bad news. Both of your eyes are damaged. We can save one, but we're going to have to implant a glass eye in your other eye. We just can't save it. And I need you to sign this surgical release. The guy grabs the paper and he's starting to sign it, and he looks up and he says, wait a minute, a glass eye? Can you make it twinkle? There's something about suffering creatively in that given the wall, we're going to do the best we can with what we have every time, everywhere. You look at Joseph's faithfulness when he hit the wall. He did the best he could with what he had every time, everywhere. Whether in slavery or elevated to positions of great glory in this Egyptian kingdom, he remained faithful to God, actively looking for how God was going to use him in this situation. So when life comes at us, folks, let's not cave in and waste time asking why and who to blame, but can we move to the better question of this? Where's God in all this? God, come and breathe into us and help us to become creative in this, because he's as close as our heartbeat. He is as close as the next breath you take in and exhale. He is as close before the next thought comes into your mind. He's already there. And he knows. He knows what's coming. He knows what is. He knows about the walls you and I have already come to in our life. It's exactly what I hear the voice of Joseph say. That we might look at circumstances and others and say, you meant this for harm. But the God I serve, he's got a different plan. I may not know what it is, but I'm going to suffer creatively in this. Sometimes we need that motivation to be reminded he's with us. I recently read this story of a guy named Dean growing up in England. Apparently in this cemetery in this town, there's lots of vines growing on the buildings, and sparrows come there to roost at night. And apparently when sparrows fall asleep, you can catch them. You just walk up and grab them. And so the kids in town, this was something they did for fun. At night, they'd sneak off from their home and go to the cemetery and catch sparrows. So Dean goes one night. He's trying to catch a sparrow. He falls into a freshly dug grave. Yeah. He's screaming. He can't get out. He's clawing his way. I mean, he just falls into exhaustion, finally, just over in the corner. He said, I don't know what I'm going to do. He hears this faint whistle, and he comes closer. He recognizes that's the same song his buddy always whistles, but he thinks, if I scream out from an empty grave, I'll never see that kid again, and I'll be stuck here. So he waits. Well, lo and behold, his friend Charlie falls into the same grave. So here's Dean sitting over here in the corner not saying anything, just kind of giggling to himself. All he can hear is his buddy Charlie clawing his way out, trying to get out of the grave. So you know what Dean did. He dropped his voice and he said, "You can jump all you want to. You're never getting out of here." Shoo! There went Charlie. You know, there's different kind of motivations in life. I want to say to you that don't let fear get you up and out. Don't let fear get you up and get you out. We have all had walls in our life. Some of you are there now, right now. For others, maybe there's a wall coming. There's one thing that doesn't change in the midst of all that, and that is the presence of God. Calling us not to bitterness, but to betterness. Calling us to not dig our place and sit at the wall, but to be launched out in suffering creatively. In case you wonder if he can get you through it, look at the cross. Pray with me. Well, Lord, the reality is in these moments, you see us and you know us. Every intimate detail of where we are in life right now. You know every fact. You know every assumption we've made about the walls in our life. Either those past, those present, or those to come. But one thing is steadfast and true, O God, and that is your strength and your presence. Because you've made a promise to us that you're always with us. And so, God, in these moments, we just ask that you come and meet us where we are. And I don't know, try to help us figure out this kind of creative suffering part for us. That we may feel empowered by your presence of knowing we're not alone. That while the world and circumstances would want to hurt us, not you. You're meaning for good to come out of it. So, Father, walk with us in these next few moments of listening to you, of responding to your pneuma nudge, the Holy Spirit that's convicting even at this moment. That maybe during this time there's individuals or couples who need to come and kneel before you, just for strength for one another, to bring their wall before you. The walls past, the walls present, maybe even praying for the walls yet to come. Maybe there are students at this moment listening, young people who know how painful the wall is that they're facing. Come quickly, O God, and may we fall into your arms at the foot of the cross. It's your invitation, not mine. Amen.